I still remember that Sunday like it was yesterday. The smell of grilled ribs, the sound of laughter that didn't quite include me. Father's Day, supposed to be a day to celebrate dads. But in my family, it had quietly turned into a show of status, a performance for social media, not love. My name's Raymond Carter, 67 years old, retired construction foreman. My hands may not be soft, but they built this town, literally. The bridges, the schools, the new shopping center, I worked on all of them. And yet that day, I stood in the corner of my daughter's fancy living room feeling like a stranger among my own blood. "Dad, come sit," my daughter Melissa called, half distracted, phone in one hand, smiling at her husband's family gathered around the mahogany table. Her husband, Dylan, always had that polished, rehearsed grin. He was the kind of man who wore cologne like armor, sharp, cold, expensive. His parents were visiting, the Watsons, owners of a chain of car dealerships. They loved to talk about legacy. I used to think legacy was about what kind of person you raised. They thought it was about how many zeros came after your name. Melissa clapped her hands. Time for gifts. Her little boy ran to his other grandfather first. "Papa Richard, open mine first." Everyone chuckled. Richard opened a box and pulled out a gold watch that practically sparkled across the room. $10,000, Dylan said proudly. Swissmade. Melissa chose it herself. Applause, smiles, photos. Melissa kissed her father-in-law on the cheek. "You deserve it," she said softly. Then she turned to me. "Oh, Dad, here." She handed me a smaller box, wrapped neatly, tied with a blue ribbon. I smiled anyway. "You didn't have to, sweetheart." Inside were a pair of socks. Plain gray. The kind you'd get in a 3-pack at the drugstore. "Nice, huh?" she said. "They're warm. You're always complaining your feet get cold." The room went silent for a moment. Even Richard coughed, sensing the awkwardness. Then Melissa laughed lightly, trying to wave it off. "Come on, it's practical. Dad doesn't need fancy stuff. He's simple." Simple. That word cut deeper than she realized. I forced a smile. "Yes, simple." Later, when Dylan raised his glass to toast all the amazing fathers here, my name didn't come up. When the cake was brought out, Melissa's son helped his Papa Richard blow out the candles. They even took a picture together while I sat quietly on the couch, holding my new socks. I didn't want to ruin her day. I just watched. But something inside me, something old and quiet, started to burn. A kind of heat I hadn't felt in years. I looked at that watch glimmering under the light, on Richard's wrist, catching every reflection in the room. And then I looked at my socks. That night, when I got home to my small house, the same one I built after my wife passed, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of cold coffee and stared at those socks again. I wasn't angry about the money. I wasn't jealous of the watch. I was heartbroken at how little my daughter saw me anymore. I'd raised her after her mother's cancer, worked double shifts, missed meals so she could go to college. And now she saw me as simple. But you see, I've learned something about life. Silence doesn't mean weakness. Sometimes it's the first sign of a storm. So when Dylan called a week later, asking me for a favor, something about helping with a renovation at his new lake house, I said yes. Because I'd just found my reason to get even. Quietly, Dylan's voice came through the phone smooth as butter. "Hey Ray, listen, we could use your expertise with something." I could hear the fake cheer in his tone. The kind of voice people use when they need you for something, but can't be bothered to respect you otherwise. "What's that?" I asked, sipping my morning coffee. "The new lake property. It needs a little work, foundation check, maybe some reinforcement. You know this stuff better than anyone. Melissa said you'd be happy to help." Melissa said that, huh? I looked at the framed photo of her on my wall. 10 years old, arms around me at a fishing pier, before she met Dylan. Before she learned to treat people like they were beneath her. "Sure," I said finally. "I'll come take a look." He gave me the address. A big place near Silver Pine Lake. One of those new luxury neighborhoods with gates and private docks. He mentioned they were planning to make it a family retreat. I almost laughed. Family. When I drove there 2 days later, the lake shimmered like glass under the morning sun. Birds, pine trees, and silence. But the house. Oh, it wasn't a cabin. It was a mansion disguised as rustic charm. 3 stories high, stone walls, imported wood. The kind of place that screams money and emptiness at the same time. Dylan came out wearing designer sunglasses and a polo shirt. He didn't offer a handshake, just nodded. "Good to see you, Ray. Sorry, I'd help." but I've got a meeting soon. Typical. He showed me the problem. Cracks in the foundation near the dock area, some drainage issues. Basic stuff for me, but he clearly had no idea what he was looking at. Think it'll cost much? He asked. I crouched, checked the soil, felt the wood beams, and hid a smile. Depends. Could get expensive if you don't handle it right. He frowned. Well, I'd rather not spend a fortune. Can you do it cheaper? Cheaper. He said it like I was a bargain bin contractor instead of the man who once built half of their city's infrastructure. I'll see what I can do, I said calmly. And in that moment, a small idea formed. Nothing cruel, just fair. A quiet balance for all the disrespect that had piled up over the years. I spent the next week there, working alone. Melissa visited once. She came by in a white SUV, brought lunch for her husband, and barely nodded my way. I heard her laugh from the patio, the same laugh that once made me smile when she was a kid. Now it felt hollow. When she finally came over to where I was working, she wrinkled her nose at the smell of sawdust. Dad, you really didn't have to do this. You should rest, not work at your age. Don't worry, I said, straightening up. It keeps me busy. Well, just don't overdo it. Dylan's paying you something, right? I looked her in the eyes. He said he'd figure it out later. Oh, she said quickly, adjusting her sunglasses. Right, of course. Anyway, we appreciate it. She didn't even know that I'd been working 10-hour days without a single meal from them. I packed my own lunch. Slept in my truck a few nights when Dylan forgot to unlock the gate. But I didn't complain, because I was learning things. About the property. About what was really happening. See, Dylan wasn't renovating the house for family. He was turning it into a private rental for executives, a side business. The family retreat was a lie, just another profit game. And he'd used Melissa's name on the paperwork to dodge taxes. It hit me hard. Not just the deceit, but the pattern. He'd taken everything honest about my daughter and twisted it into his world of polished manipulation. I realized something else too. The foundation wasn't the only thing about to crack. The final straw came one evening when I overheard Dylan on the phone. Yeah, the old man's fixing it for free. Practically charity work. I'll throw him a couple of gift cards or something. He laughed, loud, confident, and my blood ran cold. When I finished that night, I didn't drive home. I sat by the lake until the moon came up, the water reflecting the house lights like stars in reverse. I took out my old notebook, the one I used to track materials and costs back in my construction days. And on that page, I wrote one line. Respect has a price tag too. Then I started sketching. Plans. Measurements. Adjustments. If they wanted me to build, I would build. But this time, I'd build something they'd never forget. The next morning, I arrived at the lake house before sunrise. The fog rolled low over the water, curling between the dock posts like smoke. It was quiet, the kind of silence you could carve your thoughts into. I set down my old toolbox, the one with my name burned into the handle. R. Carter. My wife, Ellen, gave it to me for our 10th anniversary. I ran my fingers over her handwriting, faded from years of dust and time. She used to say, "You build things with heart, Ray. That's your gift." That day, I decided I'd build something with purpose. Dylan didn't show up that morning. He rarely did. But his voice messages did. Hey Ray, make sure the dock is strong enough to hold the new jet skis. The Watsons are coming next weekend. Don't screw it up, okay? I replayed the message twice, just to hear that last part. Don't screw it up. The arrogance of it almost made me laugh. So I got to work, measuring, sawing, adjusting. But not the way he thought. I noticed something about the property's layout. The lake sat slightly lower than the main house, and the drainage pipes led directly under the patio deck. If someone overburdened the system, water pressure would rise through the soil, softening the base structure. Not enough to collapse, just enough to make expensive stone tiles start cracking over time. So I redirected the overflow slightly. Not to destroy, but to remind. I left the structure safe, for now, but fragile enough to show the truth when greed came knocking. Because I knew Dylan. He wouldn't maintain it properly. He'd ignore the warning signs. And one day, that foundation, both literal and moral, would start breaking. That night, I sat in my truck watching the lights from inside the house. Melissa was hosting a dinner party. I could hear the laughter echoing across the water. I saw her son running around the backyard while Dylan poured wine for Richard and his wife, acting like he owned the world. I remembered when that boy used to call me Grandpa Ray and wait for me at the door. Now he barely looked up when I waved. Maybe Melissa told him I was too old, too busy. Still, I didn't hate her. I pitied her, because I saw her mother in her. The same heart, but buried under layers of image and comfort. And that's when I made up my mind. I wouldn't yell. I wouldn't shame them. I'd just let reality do the talking. By Friday, I'd finished the work. Everything looked perfect. Strong, professional, expensive. Dylan did his usual half-interested inspection. "Looks good," he said, tossing me a small envelope. "There's a little something in there for you." When I opened it, there was a $50 restaurant gift card inside. No cash. No check. Not even a thank you note. I smiled anyway. "Appreciate it." He smirked. "Hey, maybe next time we'll get you one of those watches too, huh?" That line landed like a slap, and he knew it. Melissa came out then, holding her son. She looked at me, awkwardly. "Dad, don't be mad. Dylan just likes to joke." "Of course," I said softly. "He's a funny man." She relaxed. She didn't notice my tone, but her boy did. He looked at me, eyes narrowing, as if he could sense something his mother couldn't. Kids always do. That evening, when everyone went inside, I walked down to the dock one last time. I placed my palm on the support beam, solid, but not eternal. Like people. Above me, the sky turned gold, then red, then deep blue. I whispered to the wind, "You'll learn, Dylan." Everyone does, one way or another. Then I drove home. I didn't look back. Over the next few weeks, life returned to normal. Melissa barely called. Dylan didn't either. I spent my days tending my garden, drinking coffee on the porch, and fixing old fishing rods. Until one morning, 3 weeks later, my phone rang. Melissa, crying. "Dad," she said between sobs, "something's wrong with the house. The whole patio's cracked. The stone, the stairs, everything. Dylan's furious. He says it's your fault." I didn't say a word. I just listened to the tremble in her voice. "He's saying you did something wrong," she continued. "Dad, please tell me you didn't." "I did exactly what he asked," I said calmly. "I fixed the foundation." Silence. Then a small, broken whisper. "I know you did." That's when I realized she wasn't just crying about the house. She was crying because she finally saw what I had seen for years. Who Dylan really was. How far he'd pushed her away from the people who truly cared. I hung up after we said goodbye. And as I sat there, sunlight warming my porch, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Not anger. Not revenge. Peace. Because the cracks were no accident. They were truth surfacing. And truth, once it comes out, spreads faster than water through stone. 3 days after Melissa's call, I found myself standing in front of their grand lake house again. Police tape fluttered across the patio like yellow ribbons of shame. The stone tiles, those expensive imported ones Dylan bragged about, lay shattered across the lawn. Half the deck had sunk a foot into the wet soil. I could hear voices inside. Dylan shouting. Melissa crying. A part of me wanted to turn around, drive home, and let them deal with the mess. But another part, the father part, knew my daughter was breaking inside that house, and I wasn't going to let her face it alone. So I walked up the path, past the fancy cars and shattered pride, and knocked on the door. Melissa opened it. Her face was pale, eyes swollen. "Dad," she whispered, voice trembling. "They're saying it's your fault." I nodded slowly. "Where's Dylan?" "In the living room." When I stepped inside, I saw him pacing like a caged wolf, red-faced, holding a cup of whiskey even though it was barely noon. His father, Richard, stood by the window, pretending to stay calm, but clearly enjoying the drama. Dylan spun toward me. "You've ruined everything. Do you realize how much damage this caused? Do you?" I had clients here. Investors. I looked around the room, noting the cracks crawling up the corners of the wall, not just in the foundation, but in the people. "You mean guests?" I asked. "Or customers?" His jaw clenched. "Don't play smart with me. That patio was supposed to be perfect. Now it's worthless." "You wanted it cheap," I said quietly. "And you got what you paid for." He froze. The room went dead silent. Melissa covered her mouth, and Richard's fake calm vanished. "What did you say?" Dylan hissed. I met his eyes. "You cut corners. Ignored warnings. Treated people like tools. And now you're surprised the structure cracked?" He lunged a step closer, but Melissa stepped between us. "Stop it. Both of you." She cried. "This isn't helping." I turned to her, my voice soft. "Honey, when you build on weak ground, it always falls apart. Whether it's a house, or a marriage. Her lip trembled. She knew exactly what I meant. But Dylan didn't back down. You'll pay for this, old man. I'll sue you if I have to. Go ahead, I said. But remember, I kept all my notes. Every receipt. Every instruction you gave me. You signed off on it yourself. For the first time, his face drained of color. He hadn't expected that. He'd forgotten the small details, the same way he forgot that the people he looks down on often have longer memories than he does. That evening, I stayed in a motel near the lake. Melissa texted me once. I'm sorry, Dad. For everything. I didn't reply. Not yet. I needed her to think. By morning, the story had spread, not because of me, but because of Dylan's own arrogance. He called his contractors, his clients, even his insurance agent, screaming at everyone. One of them leaked a photo of the collapsed patio to a local business forum. Within hours, the Watson Lake mansion was trending in the worst way possible. Luxury house sinks after negligent construction. Turns out, the truth spreads faster than concrete dries. 2 days later, I received a visit. Not from Melissa, from Richard Watson himself. He came to my porch in a spotless suit, driving a brand new BMW that probably cost more than my house. He didn't bother with pleasantries. Mr. Carter, he said stiffly, I believe this entire situation is a misunderstanding. Dylan might have been overconfident, but I trust you understand how public embarrassment can destroy a family's reputation. I leaned back in my chair, sipping my coffee. Reputation's like a foundation, Mr. Watson. Once it's cracked, you can patch it, but it's never the same. He forced a smile. We could compensate you, if you're willing to keep quiet about certain details. Details like your son's tax schemes. I asked calmly. That smile faded instantly. He realized I knew. I didn't explain how. Didn't need to. I'd seen the paperwork in Dylan's office during the renovation, the fake business registration, the rental agreements under Melissa's name. I knew everything. He swallowed hard, suddenly polite. I see. Perhaps this discussion is over. Perhaps, I said, and nodded toward the car. Drive safe. The ground's soft this time of year. That night, I finally answered Melissa's text. Me. Honey, I never wanted revenge. I wanted you to remember who you are. Her. I do now, Dad. I really do. I stared at that message for a long time. My wife would have been proud. Because sometimes, justice doesn't roar. It whispers through the cracks. A week later, Melissa left Dylan. Quietly. Took her son and moved into a small apartment in town. She started working again. Something real, something hers. As for Dylan, the insurance refused to pay for self-caused structural damage. His investors pulled out. His business sank, just like his perfect patio. I never gloated. Never said a word. I just mailed him one thing, a small box. Inside were those same gray socks from Father's Day, neatly folded. No note. No explanation. Just silence. The loudest message I could send. A year passed. Seasons rolled through my small town like clockwork. Spring rains, the smell of fresh-cut grass, quiet mornings with my coffee on the porch. Life felt slower now, but not empty. Peaceful. I didn't hear much from Dylan after everything. Word around town was he'd tried to rebuild his business, but failed. The lake house was sold at a loss to cover debts. Someone said they saw him working at his father's dealership, no longer the man in control, just another salesman with a pasted-on smile. And Melissa, she called every Sunday. Sometimes just to talk about her boy, sometimes to ask about the garden, sometimes to sit in silence on the other end. The walls between us, once thick as concrete, had thinned to air. Still, I never brought up that Father's Day. I didn't need to. Some wounds heal better when left unspoken. That next Father's Day morning, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I'd planned to spend the day cleaning out Ellen's old photo albums, something I'd been putting off for too long. When I opened the door, Melissa stood there. She was holding a small box. No ribbons. No bright wrapping paper. Just simple brown paper and her handwriting across the top. For Dad. Behind her stood my grandson, clutching a homemade card covered in messy crayon hearts. He grinned up at me. Happy Father's Day, Grandpa. I felt something twist inside me, something warm and sharp all at once. I stepped aside and pulled them both into a hug. Come on in, I said, voice rougher than I wanted it to be. We sat in the kitchen, the same place where I'd once stared at those socks in disbelief. Now, sunlight poured through the window, catching the dust motes like glitter. Melissa pushed the box toward me. Go on. she said softly. Open it. Inside, there wasn't a watch. There wasn't money. Just a small wooden plaque with a burned-in message. For the man who built more than houses. He built hearts that remember. My throat closed up. I traced the letters with my thumb, each word heavy as memory. I made it myself, she said, eyes wet. With the woodworking tools you left in the shed. Thought it was time I built something real too. I didn't trust my voice, so I just nodded. The boy climbed onto my lap, proudly holding up his card. It says you're my hero, Grandpa, he said. Mom said you fixed everything. Melissa smiled faintly. He means the birdhouse you built, she added quickly, but we both knew what else he meant. After lunch, we walked outside to the backyard. The summer air was warm and full of life. Kids playing down the street, distant barking, the scent of barbecue somewhere. I showed my grandson how to plant tomato seeds. His small hands pressed into the soil, clumsy but eager. Like this, Grandpa. Perfect, I said. You'll see, if you treat the ground right, it gives back double. Melissa knelt beside us, brushing dirt from her knees. Guess that's true about people too. I smiled. It is. She looked up at me, sunlight catching in her hair, and for the first time in years, I saw her. Really saw her. Not the polished woman chasing approval, but the little girl who used to run barefoot through the yard, laughing when I lifted her onto my shoulders. I'm sorry, she whispered suddenly. For everything I said. For how I treated you. I forgot what mattered. I shook my head gently. No, sweetheart. You just had to see it for yourself. That's how we all learn. She leaned over and hugged me. Long, tight, trembling. Thank you for not giving up on me. That evening, after they left, I sat alone on the porch again. But this time, the quiet didn't hurt. It healed. The plaque sat on the table beside me, next to a steaming cup of tea. Out across the sky, the last light of the day sank into gold. And as the crickets started their song, I thought about how strange life is. How sometimes the smallest cracks let the light back in. Father's Day. A year ago, it had felt like the end of something. Now it felt like the beginning. Because revenge isn't always about destruction. Sometimes it's just about watching truth rise up, steady and slow, like dawn after a long night, and realizing you don't need anyone's approval to feel whole again. I slipped on those same gray socks, the ones I once saw as an insult, and smiled. They were warm. And for the first time in a long, long while, so was I. It was late autumn when I saw him again. The air had that crisp chill that smelled like wet leaves and coming rain. I was raking the front yard, watching the last bits of sunlight fade behind the maple trees, when a car I hadn't seen in a long time rolled to a stop in front of my house. A silver BMW. Even after everything, it still looked out of place on my street. Too polished, too loud for the quiet peace I'd built. The door opened. Dylan stepped out. He looked nothing like the man I remembered, not the smooth-talking, watch-flaunting son-in-law who'd once made me feel small in my daughter's living room. His suit was wrinkled, his hair unkempt, and his eyes carried that hollow look you see in men who've run out of excuses. He hesitated before coming closer. "Ray," he said quietly, "can we talk?" I leaned on my rake. I didn't think there was much left to say. He nodded. "There isn't, but I need to say it anyway." We stood there in the cold, the wind rustling through the bare trees. He looked around the yard, my modest house, the old swing Melissa used to sit on when she was a kid. There was something almost human in his eyes for the first time. "I lost everything," he said flatly. "The business, the investors, even the house. Melissa left me, and she was right too." I didn't reply. Sometimes silence does more than words ever could. He went on, voice shaking slightly. "At first, I blamed you. Told everyone you sabotaged me. But then I saw the reports. The inspectors said it wasn't the construction, it was my own shortcuts. My greed." He paused. "You tried to warn me, didn't you?" I met his eyes. "I did. More than once." He nodded slowly, almost to himself. "I didn't listen. I thought I was smarter than you." I smiled faintly. "That's usually how a man learns, the hard way." He gave a bitter laugh. "Yeah, guess so." For a moment, we just stood there, watching a few brown leaves tumble across the yard. Then Dylan reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small black box. My stomach tightened for a second. I didn't know what to expect. He opened it. Inside was a watch. Not gold, not shiny, just a simple, worn leather-banded piece. He held it out toward me. "This was my dad's," he said quietly. "Before all this, I didn't understand what it meant to earn something. I just wanted to look successful. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to have this. I stared at the watch. The leather was cracked, the glass scratched, but it was real, honest. And for a moment, I saw not the man who'd mocked me, but the broken son who finally saw what he'd done. I took it, not as acceptance, but as acknowledgement. Dylan, I said slowly, forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about letting go of what's already done. He nodded. I know, and I hope one day Melissa can let go too. She already has, I said. You just haven't forgiven yourself yet. He looked away, swallowing hard. Tell her. I'm sorry. I think she already knows, I replied. He got back into his car, started the engine, and sat there for a moment before driving away. The headlights cut through the mist, then vanished down the hill. I stood in the quiet, the watch heavy in my palm. It ticked softly, a steady rhythm, like a second heartbeat. Maybe that's what time really is. Not something that steals from us, but something that gives us the chance to rebuild, if we're brave enough to listen. I went inside, placed the watch next to the wooden plaque Melissa had made, and sat down by the window. The wind brushed against the glass, whispering like memory. Ellen used to say, every storm leaves something clean behind. She was right. That night, I didn't think about revenge, or pain, or pride. I thought about how even broken people, given time, can learn to be whole again. And as the ticking of that old watch filled the silence, I realized that maybe this quiet understanding, was the truest kind of justice there is. 3 years later, the world had changed, not in any grand way, but in the quiet, gentle ways that matter most. The paint on my porch had started to peel again. The oak tree in the yard had grown just enough to cover half the window with shade. And every morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee and the sound of my grandson's laughter drifting down the street. Melissa and her boy had moved into the house next door. Said she wanted to be closer. I never argued. I just nodded, pretending I didn't feel my throat tighten when she told me. Life had a rhythm now. Not perfect, not rich, but honest. That Father's Day morning, I was in the backyard, fixing the old wooden bench by the fence. My grandson, now taller, louder, with that same curious spark in his eyes, was running around with a football. He'd stop every few minutes to ask, Grandpa, need help? And I'd say, in a minute, champ. He didn't know that just hearing his voice was all the help I'd ever need. Melissa came out carrying a tray, lemonade, sandwiches, a small box wrapped in brown paper. The same way she'd done years ago. She set it beside me and smiled. Before you say anything, she said, it's not socks. I laughed. Well, that's a relief. Open it, she said. Inside was a photograph, framed, simple, beautiful. It was the three of us, me, Melissa, and her son, standing by the lake a few weeks ago. The same lake that once held so much bitterness. Now it looked peaceful. In the picture, I was smiling, a real smile, not the polite kind. Underneath the photo, she'd written in small cursive letters, time heals what pride destroys. I stared at it for a while. The sun glinted off the glass, blurring my reflection with the faces of the people I loved most. It's perfect, I said quietly. Melissa sat beside me. You know, I used to think Father's Day was about showing off, proving we were doing okay. But now I just want it to mean being together. I nodded. That's all it ever needed to mean. We ate lunch outside, the wind gentle, the yard full of life. The boy told stories about school, about how he wanted to build things like Grandpa. He asked me if I still had that old watch. I lifted my wrist, the leather-banded one Dylan had given me. Still ticking, still steady. Yeah, I said. Still works fine. He squinted at it. Is it expensive? I smiled. It's worth what you put into it. Melissa looked at me then, really looked, and I saw peace in her eyes. That heavy guilt she used to carry had faded. She'd rebuilt her life, brick by brick, the right way this time. As the sun began to set, I leaned back, watching the golden light stretch across the grass. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang, slow and soft. I thought about Ellen, how proud she'd be, how she always believed that pain was just another kind of teacher. And she'd been right, because every scar I carried, every crack that life had left, had let a little light in. The revenge, the anger, the hurt, they'd all faded. What stayed was something far stronger, forgiveness, and the quiet dignity of knowing I never lost myself trying to prove my worth. That night, before bed, I placed the photo on the nightstand beside the watch and the wooden plaque. 3 pieces of a long story. One of hurt, one of truth, and one of healing. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying laughter from next door. I smiled to myself and whispered, "Happy Father's Day, Ellen. We finally got it right." Then I turned off the light, the ticking of the watch echoing softly through the dark, steady, calm, alive. And for the first time in years, I slept without any weight on my heart. It was sometime in early winter when Melissa came over one evening, holding a folded piece of paper in her hands. Her face looked calm, but her eyes told a different story, a quiet mix of nerves and reflection. "Dad," she said, standing by the door, "I found something today while cleaning the attic." She handed me the letter. The paper was yellowed, fragile, and I recognized the handwriting the second I saw it. "Ellen's." My heart paused for a second before catching up. "Where did you find this?" "In your old tool chest," she said softly. "Behind the drawers. It must have been there for years." I sat down at the kitchen table and slowly unfolded it. The smell of paper and time filled the room. Melissa sat across from me, quiet, as I began to read. "My dearest Ray, if you're reading this, it means you've lived long enough to see our daughter grow. I hope she still laughs like she used to. I hope she found love that treats her kindly. And I hope you kept your heart soft, even when life wasn't fair. You always tried to protect everyone, even from themselves. That's your greatest gift and your heaviest burden. If Melissa ever forgets who she is, don't blame her. Just remind her the way only you can, by example. You don't need to raise your voice to be heard. Your silence says more than thunder ever could. And if one day you find yourself sitting alone, wondering if you did enough, know this: you did. You always did. Love, always and forever. Ellen." When I finished, I couldn't speak. My throat closed, my vision blurred. I'd spent so many years carrying the guilt of not saving everyone, of not being enough, and now, somehow, from beyond time, Ellen had answered the question I'd never dared to ask out loud. Melissa reached out and took my hand. "I never knew she wrote that," she whispered. "She was talking about me, wasn't she?" I nodded. "Both of us." She smiled through tears. "She was right about your silence, you know? You never needed to yell. You just waited until I found my way back." I let out a slow breath. Guess your mom always knew how to fix things, even the broken ones. After she left that night, I sat at the table for hours, reading the letter again and again. The ink had faded, but the words carried more weight than anything I'd built with my hands. When the clock struck midnight, I went out to the porch. The first snow had started to fall, slow, gentle flakes landing on the old wooden railing. I looked at the stars and whispered, "You were right, Ellen. You always were." And then, for the first time since she'd passed, I didn't feel alone. I felt watched over. In the weeks that followed, something in me changed again. I started volunteering at the local workshop, teaching young men how to use tools, the same way I taught Melissa once. Most of them came from broken homes, rough stories. They didn't talk much, but they listened. One boy, maybe 16, asked me one day, "Why do you still work, Mr. Carter? You don't need to anymore." I smiled. "Because if you stop building things, kid, even small ones, you stop building yourself." He nodded like he understood, even if he didn't yet. But he would. Someday. Later that month, Melissa stopped by again, bringing her son to help around the yard. They fixed a few things, trimmed branches, replaced a fence post. Afterward, she stood by the gate, watching the sunset over the fields. "You know," she said softly, "I think Mom would be proud of us now." "I think she already is," I said. She smiled. "And you're still teaching people how to build." "Guess I don't know how to stop," I said, laughing. "It's in my bones." That night, before bed, I placed Ellen's letter beside the watch, the photo, and the plaque. For pieces of one long life. Every one of them earned the hard way. I whispered into the stillness of my little house. "Thank you for finding your way back, Melissa." Outside, the snow kept falling, quiet, endless, forgiving. And for the first time in a lifetime, I realized I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. The years rolled by quietly, as they always do when a man stops counting. My hair turned silver, then white. My hands grew slower, stiffer, but they still remembered the feel of wood, of nails, of steady purpose. Most mornings I'd wake before sunrise, sit on the porch with a mug of black coffee, and watched the mist crawl across the fields. The world had softened around me. So had I. Melissa visited almost every day, sometimes with her boy, now nearly grown, sometimes just to bring me pie or fuss over the garden. "You should rest more, Dad," she'd say, though I could see in her eyes that she liked finding me working. It reminded her that I was still here, still the same man who'd once built her childhood swing, her first treehouse, her sense of home. One morning, I was sanding a small birdhouse when I heard footsteps behind me. "Grandpa," my grandson said, voice deeper now, almost a man's. "Mom said you built half this town. Is that true?" I chuckled. "Half's an exaggeration. Maybe a third." He smiled. "Still a lot." He picked up a hammer, turning it in his hands. "I think I want to do what you did. Build things. Not offices or computers, real things. Things people touch." Something inside me swelled with quiet pride. "Then you already understand what most people never do," I said. "It's not about what you make. It's about what stays standing when you're gone." He nodded, serious. "I want to make something that lasts." Later that day, while Melissa and he worked on repainting the fence, I sat inside at my old desk, sorting through papers. Receipts, faded photographs, little pieces of life that didn't mean much to anyone else. And then, buried under a stack of old notebooks, I found something unexpected, the first pair of gray socks, still neatly folded. I held them for a long time, feeling the worn threads between my fingers. It was strange. The same gift that once made me feel invisible now filled me with gratitude. Those socks had started everything. The humiliation, the silence, the change. Without them, maybe none of us would have found our way back. I placed them in the drawer next to Ellen's letter. They belonged there, with the story of who we'd been and who we'd become. That evening, Melissa stayed for dinner. We ate simple, soup and bread, just like her mother used to make. Afterward, she lingered at the table while her son washed the dishes. The light from the lamp caught her face, and for a moment, she looked like Ellen again. "Dad," she said suddenly, "I want to ask you something." "Go on." "When you saw me, when I treated you the way I did back then, why didn't you ever yell at me? Why didn't you walk away?" I thought for a long moment before answering. "Because love isn't a debt, honey. It's a seed. You don't stop watering it just because the ground's dry." Her eyes filled, but she smiled. "You really never stopped believing in me, did you?" "Not for a second." She reached across the table and took my hand. "I don't say it enough, but thank you for everything. For not giving up on me. For teaching me what real strength looks like." I squeezed her hand gently. "You did the hardest part yourself. You learned." That night, after they'd gone home, I stepped outside one last time. The sky was clear and full of stars, the kind of night that makes you feel small but lucky to be alive. I thought about Ellen, about Dylan, about all the noise and silence that had made up my life. It wasn't perfect, but it was true. I realized then that revenge had never been my ending. It was just a doorway, one that led me here, to this peace, to this quiet kind of victory. The greatest revenge wasn't proving them wrong. It was becoming the man who didn't need to anymore. Inside, the house creaked with warmth and memory. On the wall above my desk hung the photograph from the lake, the wooden plaque, and now, the watch. Below them, in the drawer, the socks. I smiled, whispered good night to the empty room, and turned out the light. Outside, the wind rustled softly through the trees, like a voice that had been with me all along. Tomorrow, my grandson and I would start building a new fence. And I knew, as sure as the dawn, that when I was gone, he'd keep building too. Spring came early that year. The air smelled of rain and soil, and my small garden, the one I'd tended for decades, came alive again. Tulips, mint, the stubborn little cherry tree that refused to die. I spent most of my mornings outside, sitting on the porch with coffee, wrapped in an old flannel blanket, watching the world wake up. The years had slowed me down. My steps were shorter, my breath heavier, but my mind was clear. Time, I'd learned, doesn't steal wisdom, it sharpens it. It strips away the noise until all that's left is what really matters. Melissa still came by every day. She never missed a morning, even when she was busy with work or her son. She'd bring groceries, sometimes pastries, sometimes nothing but her company. And every time she'd leave, she'd kiss my forehead and say, "Love you, Dad." And I'd answer the same way. More. One Sunday, she arrived with a camera. "Dad, can I record you for something?" she asked shyly. Just a little video for us to keep. You know, for the future. I laughed. You make it sound like I'm about to disappear. Just humor me, she said, setting up the tripod. I sat in my old chair by the porch. Behind me, the garden glowed under the morning sun. Melissa pressed the record button. So, she began softly, what would you want your grandson, and me, to remember about you? I looked into the camera for a long time before speaking. My voice came out rough, but steady. Remember that people forget words, but they never forget kindness. Remember that silence can be stronger than shouting. Remember that pride builds walls, but humility builds bridges. And remember, forgiveness isn't about who deserves it. It's about who needs peace. Melissa lowered the camera, her eyes shining. Dad, I smiled. One more thing. If you ever feel like the world stopped caring, build something. Anything. It doesn't matter if it's small. It'll remind you you're still alive. The weeks passed quietly after that. My body grew weaker, but I didn't fear it. I'd lived a full circle, from love to loss, from anger to peace. I'd seen pride crumble and family rebuild. One night, I sat at my desk, lit only by the warm glow of a lamp. The same old watch ticked beside me. I took a fresh sheet of paper and began to write. Melissa, if you're reading this, it means I've gone where your mother's been waiting. Don't grieve too long. You gave me back my joy. That's more than enough for one life. Keep that letter your mother wrote. Read it whenever life gets loud again. And tell my grandson that he was my second chance at doing everything right. The tools in the shed are his now. Let him build something with them, something of his own. And when you see the sun hit the lake in the morning, know that I'm still there, in the light, in the quiet, in every small thing we fix together. Love always. Dad. I folded the note carefully and tucked it inside Ellen's letter. Then I sat back, feeling that deep, familiar calm. The kind that comes when a man's done running from his own story. A few weeks later, the world moved on, as it always does. But something stayed. Melissa kept the house exactly as it was. She and her son took care of the garden, repainted the porch, and hung the plaque above the door. The birdhouses remained full. The cherry tree bloomed stronger than ever. Every Father's Day, they'd sit together on that same porch. Her son, now a young man, always wore the old watch. He'd glance at it, listen to the steady ticking, and smile. Because even after everything faded, the money, the grudges, the pain, what remained was the rhythm of love that never stopped. And somewhere, beyond time and noise, an old builder rested easy, knowing that the things he made, both with his hands and his heart, would keep standing long after he was gone. 3 years after my father's funeral, the house still smelled like him. Not the heavy scent of cologne or dust, but the faint aroma of wood, coffee, and rain-soaked soil, the scent of work well done and peace well earned. Every corner of that house carried his fingerprints. The rocking chair that creaked when no one sat in it. The tiny burn marks on the kitchen table where he used to fix clocks. The old toolbox with his initials carved deep into the handle. I promised myself I wouldn't cry every time I came here, but some promises are harder to keep than others. My son, Ethan, followed me inside, taller now, broader, wearing the same flannel jacket his grandpa had once worn. The sleeves were too short for him, but he refused to take it off. He walked slowly through the hallway, stopping in front of the wooden plaque above the door. For the man who built more than houses, he built hearts that remember. He touched the words with his fingers. He really did, didn't he, Mom? I nodded. More than he'll ever know. We spent the morning cleaning. Not because the house was dirty, Dad never let it be, but because it felt wrong to let it fade. Dust settled like time's shadow, and I couldn't bear to see it erase the place that had held so much of him. When I opened the drawer of his old desk, I found a sealed envelope I hadn't seen before. On the front, written in his familiar, shaky handwriting, were 3 words. For Ethan's hands. I swallowed hard and passed it to my son. He looked at me, uncertain. Should I open it? Yes, I whispered. It's yours now. Inside was a single note, written with that steady, slow care that had defined my father all his life. Ethan, you come from a long line of builders. Not the kind who chase fortune, but the kind who make the world steadier by being in it. Your mother once lost her way trying to impress others. I once lost mine thinking love meant sacrifice without limits. But we both learned something. The strongest foundations aren't made of stone or money. They're made of forgiveness. These hands you have, they'll build your story. Don't use them to chase wealth. Use them to fix what's broken, to comfort, to create. And when someone gives you something small, don't measure its price. Measure its meaning. Love. Grandpa Ray. Ethan didn't speak for a while. He just stared at the letter, his jaw trembling. Then he folded it carefully and slipped it into his jacket pocket. I'm going to keep that with me, he said. Everywhere. I nodded. That's exactly what he'd want. Outside, the clouds broke, letting sunlight flood through the window, lighting up the workbench where Dad used to sit. The same beam of light that had fallen there for years, as if the house itself still remembered where to shine. That afternoon, Ethan went out to the shed. He spent hours there, hammering, sanding, humming to himself. I stayed inside, listening to the rhythm of it through the open window. It sounded like life coming back to the house. When he finally came out, he was covered in sawdust, smiling from ear to ear. Come see, Mom. Inside the shed stood a new birdhouse, freshly built, hanging from the same beam where his grandfather had once worked. The wood was raw, uneven, imperfect, and absolutely beautiful. On the bottom, carved in simple letters, he'd written, R.C., still building. I pressed my hand to my mouth, tears burning my eyes. He would have loved this, I whispered. Ethan grinned. He taught me, didn't he? That evening, we sat on the porch, watching the birds flutter around the new house, the garden alive again under the warm light. Ethan rested his arm on the railing and said, Mom, do you think Grandpa knew how much he changed everything? I thought about that for a long moment before answering. No, I said softly. I think he just hoped he did. The rest, he left to us. The wind picked up then, gentle but sure. Somewhere in the distance, I swore I heard the faint creak of the old chair rocking by itself. Maybe it was just the wind. Maybe not. I looked up at the sky and smiled. Happy Father's Day, Dad, I whispered. Your hands are still here. Ethan leaned his head on my shoulder, the evening settling around us like a memory that didn't hurt anymore. And as the sun dipped behind the trees, the watch on his wrist, that old leather-banded one Grandpa once wore, caught the last ray of light. It ticked, steady and strong, a heartbeat that refused to fade. Time, I realized, hadn't taken my father from us. It had simply passed his rhythm on.